Good afternoon, members and members of the public. Very warm welcome to this afternoon's Planning Committee. We're all sitting comfortably. Excellent. Democratic support. Do we have any apologies in respect to today's meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Smith. Councillor Pengelly will be substituting. Apologies from Councillor Riley, and Councillor Stoneman will be attending late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, at this point, any declarations of interest? I trust you've all filled in your forms, but I'll just go around the room. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. All the forms have been handed in. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, item number 3. Members, you've had a copy of the minutes, which I'm sure you've read in great detail, of our last meeting held on the 15th September. Are there any comments in respect to the minutes? No? Great. I'll sign those after today's meeting. Item number 4, Chair's urgent business. I haven't been appraised of any urgent business, so thank you. And item number 5, questions for members of the public. Again, I haven't been appraised of any questions. Thank you very much. That brings us along to item number 6.1, application in respect of 21 Mutley Road. Members, you'll find those papers at pages 5 to 30 of your pack in respect of today's meeting. Amy, I believe you're going to run us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So good afternoon. This application being considered today is a technical detail consent for 4 dwellings at 21 Mutley Road, following the approval of a permission in principle. The application is being referred to Planning Committee by Councillor Mahoney. The site is located at the east end of an existing terrace of properties in a raised position above Mutley Road in Manamead. The site is understood to have previously formed part of a garden of Sturmont House located to the rear of the site. The site is located in the Manamead Conservation Area. A key consideration in this case is the previously approved permission in principle. I have therefore thought it would be helpful to advise what a permission in principle is and what has been allowed on site. So back to basics. Permission in principle is a consent route Permission in principle consent is an alternative way of obtaining planning permission for minor housing-led development, which separates the consideration of matters of principle for proposed development from the technical detail of the development. The permission in principle consent, therefore, has 2 stages, one being the permission in principle stage, which establishes whether the site is suitable, and then the technical detail stage, which looks at the details of the development. When considering a permission in principle application, the only things that are being considered are the location, land use, and the amount of development. All matters are therefore considered after at the technical detail consent. Following a grant of permission in principle, the site must receive a grant of technical detail consent before development can proceed. The granting of technical detail consent has the effect of granting full planning permission for the development. An application for permission in principle for the development of 4 dwellings was submitted in 2019. To support the application, indicative plans were submitted that showed a terrace of 4 dwellings. Along with the submitted plans, it was also a tree survey to show that the site could accommodate the proposed 4 dwellings, along with the retaining a number of trees on site, and showed opportunities for tree planting. These were the plans that were considered under the permission in principle application. The permission in principle application was refused at Planning Committee due to the amount of development proposed. The application was refused as it was considered that the 4 dwellings would be an unacceptable development of a garden space and result in town cramming. It was also considered that the development would have an unacceptable impact on the protected trees on site and would not be able to provide adequate mitigation. The loss of the protected trees was also considered to have an unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. The application was taken to appeal and was allowed appeal by the inspector. I am now going to provide quite a text-heavy presentation, so I apologise, but I think it's really important to give you what the inspector said at the appeal. When considering the impact on the conservation area, the inspector stated that the site is somewhat detached from the historic buildings that contribute to the significance of the conservation area. It does, though, contain a number of trees, so to contribute to the verdant character of the conservation area. However, the extent of this contribution is reduced by the form of many of these trees, which have been lopped to reduce the impact on neighbouring properties or poorly managed. There are, however, 2 large trees that make a contribution towards the wider area. Due to the size, form and wide-ranging visibilities, these are a lime and sycamore, which are subject to a tree preservation order. Aside from these 2 trees, the site does not make a positive contribution to the street scene. Viewed through the axis, the electricity substation and the featureless gable end of number 21 are unattractive features. There is also a range of outbuildings and outside storage which gives the site a rather run-down appearance. These features are only partially hidden by the overgrown roadside wall and hedge, which also contribute to the unkept appearance of the site. Overall, therefore, the contribution that the site makes to the significance of the wider conservation area is limited to the positive impact of these 2 trees. The area immediately around the appeal site is categorised by high-density terraced housing. The indicative plan submitted with the application show how 4 houses could be accommodated on the site as a continuation of the existing terrace, with the same front and rear building lines. Based on this layout, the houses would be a similar width to those in the adjoining terrace and would have rear gardens of a comparable size. The proposed houses would therefore be in keeping with the scale and layout of the adjacent development and consequently would not appear cramped. Such a layout could be secured through the technical detail consent stage process. The indicative layout also demonstrates the impact that this form of development would have on the existing trees on the site. Together with the potential for new tree planting, the roadside boundary hedge trees would be removed to allow access and parking for the houses. The protected lime tree and the beeches on the eastern boundary would be felled to allow space for the building, and a small suppressed hawthorn towards the rear of the site would also be removed. This would considerably reduce the amount of tree cover on site. However, much of the tree cover has a limited lifespan, regardless of the development. Permission to fell the lime tree was granted in February 2018, as it was found to be structurally compromised by a large open cavity in the stem base. While this permission has lapsed, there is no evidence to suggest that the health of the tree has improved. The beech trees on the eastern boundary have already been lopped, and their sizes and proximity to the house to the east makes their long-term retention incompatible with the residential amenity of the occupants of that property. Previous planning permission for the development of the site included the removal of most of these trees. The roadside hedge trees overhang the road to a significant extent, and it is likely that some management will be necessary as they continue to grow. Consequently, the existing tree cover on the site is unlikely to be viable in its current form in the longer term. The indicative plans show that all trees on the southern boundary, including the large protected sycamore, could be retained. They also showed that the 3 additional trees and a new hedgerow could be planted on the southern and eastern boundaries. The planting of suitable species and appropriate future management to ensure their long-term contribution to the character of the conservation area could be secured through the technical detail consent stage. The existing high roadside boundary hedge trees are not characteristic of Mutley Road or the western portion of the conservation area in general, where terraced houses are open to view behind low front boundary walls. The characteristic tree cover in this part of the conservation area is mainly provided in the parks or on the streets. The indicative plan show that 5 street trees could be planted along the frontage of the site to mitigate the removal of the roadside boundary vegetation. This form of landscaping would be characteristic of the wider conservation area, particularly of the terraced housing area to the west. Therefore, once established, the street trees would make a positive contribution to the significance of the conservation area. And finally, the inspector did conclude, overall, therefore, the indicative drawings show that the site could accommodate a terrace of 4 houses that would be similar in scale and layout to the adjoining terrace. Such a development would not appear out of character with its surroundings. The retained and replacement planting to the south would maintain a verdant backdrop to the buildings, and the replacement planting to the eastern boundary would be more compatible with the adjacent house, so it could be maintained in the longer term. The street trees would be a more characteristic of the conservation area than the existing boundary treatment. Therefore, whilst there would be some immediate reduction in tree cover, the retained and replacement planting would ensure there would be no long-term harm to the character or appearance of the conservation area. So the application that's being considered today is the technical detail consent following the inspector's decision to approve the permission in principle. What I've done now is just to give some more images of the site so you get a better understanding of what the application site is and where it is positioned. So the application site there is located in the middle. Sorry, I thought I could get my mouse on so I could show you with a pointer, but it's the treed section in between the terrace right in the middle of the screen, and you've got Martley Park just in the distance. Similar, just a different angle. You can see the treed site in between the existing terrace, and you can note the different types of designs of buildings surrounding it. So we've got some quite traditional terraces just adjacent to it. We've also got some pairs of semi-detached properties, and we've also got some bungalows that are just opposite the site. The site is just within the conservation area. This is just a view looking towards the application site. The houses, these houses here are, we've got a pair of semi-detached and a detached property there. They are within the conservation area, and you can see the ward boundary on the other side, and you can see the site with the trees just in the background. And this is just another angle looking up from Mutley Road, where these houses are quite a traditional style, but these aren't within the conservation area. But again, you can kind of see the tall wall boundary with the application site in the background. So this is showing the kind of gabled end, if you can just see through the entrance of the site of number 21, in which the proposed development is supposed to be attached to, a continuation of that terrace. And we've got the boundary trees that you can see just there. So this is the proposed site plan. The permission seeks a terrace of 4 dwellings, which will be a continuation of the existing terrace. The dwellings are proposed to have an integral garage at ground floor with living accommodation above. Each unit will be served by 2 car parking spaces, 1 within the garage and then 1 on a drive to the front. The garages will also accommodate an EV charging point and cycle storage. It is also proposed to create a new footpath along the frontage of the site, which would also link into the existing footpath at either side along Mutley Road. The application was, I'm sorry, it's not that clear, but a vehicle tracking plan was submitted with the application to demonstrate that cars can exit and enter the proposed parking, and they also considered the on-street parking that's also on site. The local highway authority considered the submitted details and considered the development to be acceptable, subject to conditions, which included further details of the street details, a highway dilapidation survey, and a construction management plan to be submitted and agreed by the local planning authority. The proposal is for a 3.5-storey stepped terrace. It's stepped as it goes with the lay of the land. The proposed design is modern while incorporating some features of the existing traditional buildings in a contemporary way, such as the large bay windows. The proposed building will have a stone plinth made of reclaimed stone with stairs leading up to the front door, which will be at first floor level. The proposed walls at upper level are proposed to be honey buff brick, which I've got an image just here that you can see. Our urban design team have raised an objection to the use of the brick, saying that it's not common within the local area, and which I agree with. So I have minded to put a condition on that all the external materials have to be agreed prior to work commencing on site. The urban designer also raised concerns about the proposed ground floor garages and the hard standing area perpendicular to Mutley Road. They said this would be out of character and be visually intrusive. However, considering the existing street scene, which does feature some driveways and garages and has a mix of designs, I did not consider this to be a reason to refuse the application. The design of the development does seek to have the plinth in stone along with the steps, which I consider to be in keeping with the local area. The Historic Environment Officer and the Urban Design Officer also objected due to the loss of the boundary wall and trees along the front due to its impact on the conservation area. However, considering the inspector's comments, which I just mentioned previously, I did not think this was a reason to refuse the application, as the inspector did not consider the boundary or the trees to make a positive contribution to the conservation area, and the proposal to provide street trees was something that would enhance the conservation area. The proposed dwellings comply with the national space standards and each have their own private garden. However, it is noted that not all of the gardens are in accordance with the guidance set out in our supplementary planning documents in terms of size. But considering the close proximity to Mutley Park and also the size of the surrounding dwellings, gardens, didn't consider this a reason to refuse this application. The site would not comply also with the SBD guidance set out for separating distances between habitable room windows in terms of privacy to the properties to the front at Mutley Road, which is, if you can see, is just on your left-hand side to the proposed units which are in the middle. But considering that that is a similar distance to the existing properties along Mutley Road, didn't consider that a reason to refuse this application. And also to the property to the rear, it doesn't comply with the SBD guidance in terms of habitable room windows looking onto each other, but given the ground level changes, the provision of a planting and the existing boundary treatment, it provides screening, so therefore didn't consider it to impact on privacy. So I've just proposed showing the ground floor plans to show the 2-car parking spaces, along with showing that it's got space for the EV charging points, cycle storage. They've also got internal refuge storage shown as well on the ground floor. The upper floor, so the first floor level, this would be where most of the living accommodation is situated. And the upper 2 floors are where the bedrooms would be located. This is the submitted tree information, which shows the trees that will be removed, which are outlined in red, and the trees that are looking to be retained, which are outlined in black. The protected line, which I've mentioned previously, is the one that is T16, which is the one that's the centre of that site. That is proposed to be removed. But given the inspector's comments saying about the previous application which allowed the removal of this tree, we haven't got any objections to its removal. The protected sycamore, which is at the back, which is T12, shown on that plan, which is kind of in the pink dotted dashed line at the bottom there, that is proposed to be retained. A total of 12 trees are proposed to be removed from site, and they're proposed to be replaced with 24, 4 of which will be street trees. The Natural Infrastructure team have considered the submitted details and have no objection to the proposal, highlighting that while guidance indicates that 37 replacement trees would be needed, they considered that the proposed 24 replacement trees are sufficient given the size of the size and also the costs associated with providing these street trees. Conditions are recommended that require further details to provided to ensure the longevity of the trees, including detailed planting and management plans, details of replacement locations, tree pit details, and species of native trees, and a maintenance schedule. The proposed development would provide 4 contemporary dwellings as a continuation of the existing terrace. The proposal will regrettably result in the loss of tree cover on site. However, the retained replacement trees and forestry trees will ensure the development would not harm the character of the conservation area, and with the added conditions will ensure that they are suitably maintained. The decision is a finely balanced, but ultimately, on balance, it is considered the proposed development with the recommended conditions is acceptable. I've also brought colleagues from our Highway Authority and Natural Infrastructure team if you have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that presentation. Note, colleagues behind, we'll come to those, I'm sure, during questions from members. We do have some speakers in respect of this matter. The first speaker on my list is Councillor Mahoney. Councillor Mahoney, would you like to come down beside the officer, please? Councillor Mahoney, you're well versed in these matters. You have 5 minutes to speak. Would you like a 1-minute reminder?
Thank you, Chair. I might have finished by then, but a minute warning would be appreciated.
Thank you. Well, when you're ready, Councillor, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I seem to have a bit of deja vu over this planning application. I've known this site well over the years because of the various previous applications that have been placed on this site. It is a close-knit community on the edge of the conservation area, and the first thing that strikes you when you walk up Oxford Avenue and into Mutley Road is this huge green canopy of trees that are obvious for all to see, and you've seen them on the photographs. And these act as trees and bushes for wildlife and birds, and also act as a green lung for the area. This road is also an effective cul-de-sac, really, because only small vehicles can access from Manamead Road. I mean, that is a one-way road accessing from Manamead Road to the top of Mutley Road. And if you actually come up Oxford Avenue to Mutley Road, there is no proper turning circle at the top, and this is where the proposed building site is. Vehicles would be forced to perform 3-point turns and other, well, maybe 5-point or 6-point turns and other complicated manoeuvres to turn the car, or particularly a larger vehicle, around where this development is proposed. And any more cars, and particularly lorries, will cause difficulties and potential danger to pedestrians, cyclists, as well as other vehicles. I have great concerns about the loss of habitat, and not just the protected trees, but the hedgerows and the large trees and bushes which you have already seen in the photographs on all 3 sides, or on 3 sides of this site. These cannot be reinstated quickly or even the longer term. I note that the lime tree is still in existence. Car parking is tight in this street. On Sunday evening I went up and there was no spaces at the top end of Mutley Road for anyone else to park, and I had to park much further down by Mutley Park. I know there are potentially 2 parking spaces per house, but actually one of them's in a garage, and how many people actually do put their cars in garages, particularly when there's a parking space outside. It makes the logistics of coming and going quite difficult. So potentially, with 4 4-bedroomed houses, we do have a potential for quite a number of further cars on this site or in this road. Also, number 21 uses this site as parking at the moment. I mean, there's parking up there probably for about half a dozen vehicles or more. So those vehicles also are going to have to be accommodated on-street parking, which I don't think has been addressed. The process of construction distresses me or concerns me because I really do not know how large vehicles will access the site. They cannot enter from Manamead Road. It is not wide enough with parked cars, and they will not be able to turn around, particularly as there is an area of land which I hope will be extrapolated on later, that actually is not in public ownership. It's a sort of square piece of land which belongs to one of the houses and would not be available for cars to turn around on. In fact, it's part of the pavement, really. Perhaps that could be enlarged upon later. Regarding the appearance, I do not feel that 4-storey houses are in keeping within the area, and I note the comments from the urban design team and the historic environmental officers about the removal of the the limestone wall, and also the appearance and the obtrusive appearance of these new proposed properties right on the pavement. I also note that they're not significantly far apart to fit modern standards, either from Hermitage Road at the back or from the houses on the other side of Mutley Road, because they do not fit the modern distance which is required. And I'm very confused about what is contained in the report about windows that do not open and obscure windows. And it seems to me that some of these must be in the bedrooms to try and resolve the problem. In conclusion, I have grave concerns about aspects of this development, its appearance, the location of the buildings on the site, how it will be developed, and the effect on parking and traffic issues in this already densely populated area, which is effectively a cul-de-sac. I'm sure the committee will give all the consideration to these matters in the interest of the Mutley Road community, which I know well from door knocking and previous planning applications, and they are all opposed to the development of this site in its proposed form. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mahoney. Mr. James is next on my list. Mr. James, would you like to come to the spot down here by the officer, please? Mr. James, you also have 5 minutes. Would you like a 1-minute reminder?
Why not? But I should be finished by then.
There's no charge, so let's throw it in there. When you're ready, Mr. James.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for providing the opportunity to speak as an objector to the planned development of 4 houses adjacent to 21 Mutley Road. I would like to emphasise that I represent the local community in speaking out against this planning application. There has been an amazing number of objections, and it has effectively galvanised and united virtually all the neighbourhood, not only those who live in Mutley Road, against it. This development does not, in our view, preserve or enhance the conservation area. It is detrimental to the local character and is a clear example of urban overdevelopment, of town cramming. The site is in the Manmead Conservation Area. One of the characteristics of this area is the tree cover, which for Plymouth is extensive. The site has numerous trees with protection orders on 2 of them, plus a substantial hedgerow and limestone wall along the frontage to Mutley Road. Although considered by some to be replaceable, the proposed replacements, street trees and planters, will simply not have the same character as the features they are replacing. The loss of green space and potential habitat for wildlife will have yet another detrimental effect to the conservation and local area. Although there has been a revision to the parking arrangements, they remain insufficient and road safety will be affected. Off-road parking at the 4 houses is for the cars to be parked in tandem, with the one in the garage blocked by the car in the drive, making it very unlikely that both spaces will be constantly used, if at all. Also, it is somewhat naive to believe that all owners will keep a car in the garage. There will also be insufficient turning circles to enter the drives, as there are usually cars parked on the opposite side of the road. Plus, as Councillor Mahoney pointed out, the owners of number 21 currently use the land for their own parking, which will not be possible if this development proceeds. The widening of the road will be inconsequential, as the owners will park their cars outside their houses. Also, Mutley Road is used by visitors to 2 care homes to park their cars, as well as the staff of the care homes. Car parking is difficult enough. 8, if not more, additional cars will make it even more difficult. There will inevitably be heavy use of Mutley Road by construction traffic for a considerable length of time. Access from Manmead Road is not possible for any vehicles longer or wider than a large van. They would have to drive from the Hyde Park end of Oxford Avenue, past the park, which is used extensively by children from the neighbourhood and the local school. On arrival at the site, there will be no room to turn or to drive back down Mutley Road and Oxford Avenue. Exit to Manmead Road is not possible, as it is no entry. The electrical substation has already been moved once and will need to be moved once again. More work requiring large, heavy construction vehicles moving up and down a very narrow road with restricted access. All this will without doubt seriously impact road safety for both pedestrians and drivers. Also, heavy vehicles using both Mutley Road and Oxford Avenue will cause even more damage to an already uneven road surface. In conclusion, I would like to stress that the objections to the proposal are not motivated by a NIMBY attitude. Planning permission for one house was granted. However, the 4 houses would be detrimental to the character, look and feel of the conservation and local area.
1 minute remaining.
Not just for those currently living there, but for future residents and children growing up in what, at the moment, is one of the most pleasant areas of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Summerfield, would you like to come down and sit beside the officer, please? Mr. Summerfield, you too have 5 minutes. Would you like a 1 minute reminder? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon on behalf of the applicant. We note and welcome the officer's report and recommendation. There are, however, some points that we would like to make to you before you consider the application. Firstly, I would highlight our work to date with the Council through the pre-application and application process to achieve a positive outcome for this site. We have listened to the pre-application feedback and we have amended the proposals. We are very pleased that the report confirms that officers consider the proposal to be of high quality and one that will respect and not compete with the existing Victorian buildings. As you've already been advised, this site was subject of an application for permission in principle in 2019. Members considered that application and concluded it was unacceptable. Following an appeal, a planning inspector scrutinised and considered each of the matters in the reason for refusal in detail and concluded that the proposal was acceptable and granted permission. Crucially, the inspector decided that the site can accommodate a terrace of 4 houses of a similar scale and layout to the adjoining terrace, and that such a development would not be out of character with the surroundings. As confirmed in the submission and the committee report, in terms of trees, this scheme is consistent with the proposal set out in the permission in principle application that the inspector considered to be acceptable. The only trees that will be taken out have previously been given consent for their removal due to either being of low amenity value, a nuisance, or limited remaining life. The proposed replacement planting is substantial and high quality, in particular the street trees, which will be appropriately planted specimens and remain in the public realm in perpetuity. We understand that the intention is to put a tree preservation order on those trees. If permission isn't granted, then these trees will, with a limited life, will still be removed in accordance with the previous approvals. The inspector's decision is clear and confirms that the location, land use, and the amount of development has already been tested thoroughly through the planning process and found to be acceptable. The determination of this application must therefore be focused on the technical aspects and the detail of the design. As noted, the impact on the proposed development on the conservation area was specifically considered through the appeal. This application is accompanied by a detailed assessment of the impact of the proposals on the designated area that's been prepared by a specialist consultant. The assessment carefully considers the impact of the scheme, including the suitability of the architectural approach, changes to the boundary wall, and the loss and planting of trees. It concludes the proposed development will preserve the character and enhance the appearance of the conservation area in time. It therefore complies with historic environment legislation and relevant planning policies. Whilst the Council's Heritage Officer has maintained an objection, following careful consideration of the evidence, the officer concludes the impact will be acceptable and that the loss of the boundary wall and trees do not provide a reasonable grounds for refusal. We've reviewed the concerns regarding the impacts on the amenity of neighbours, and as you'll appreciate, it is necessary to consider such impacts within their context. It is not abnormal in a tight residential area for people to experience a degree of overlooking or overshadowing. This is to be expected. What's important is whether or not that is reasonable. And through consideration of these issues in the design, the proposals have been found not to have a significant or unreasonable impact. The acceptability of the principle of the proposed development has been established, and it is not a matter that is up for consideration again. Whilst there have been objections, the officer has presented you with a balanced assessment of these and concludes that they do not constitute reasonable grounds for refusal. An inspector has already considered the impacts of the proposed development on the conservation area, specifically the loss of trees and the existing wall. The application is also accompanied by an assessment which demonstrates the proposals will preserve the character and enhance the conservation area.
1 minute remaining.
Finally, we would note that there are no objections to the proposal on the grounds of highways, biodiversity or drainage, and that the natural infrastructure team do not object either and support the proposals. The scheme can also meet the Council's low carbon requirements. In light of the information provided with the application and the officer's report, the committee are respectfully asked to approve the application today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Summerfield. Members, there was a site visit accompanied with the officers yesterday. Councillor Tuffin, Councillor Stevens and I attended the site visit. I understand also that Councillor Watkin managed to undertake a site visit, albeit not with the officers or with the applicant in that matter, in advance of today's meeting. Councillors, you've heard the speakers and the officers' presentation. The matter is now open for debate. Who would like to go first? Councillor Gosling.
Thank you very much. My question relates to the lime tree, the protected lime tree on the current property. It's said that the existing tree cover is reaching the end of its life. Given that lime trees usually have a longevity in the hundreds of years, up to 400 years, how old would you estimate that the lime tree is currently at the property?
Good afternoon, everyone. We were hoping to find that in the information. So no, I don't have an answer as to the age, but I think the point you might be making is in terms of, would you expect a lime tree to be here for a long time or not? A healthy one, yes. And we've assessed in the past whether the decay warrants removal, and at that point we agreed it would warrant removal. Does that answer your question, or?
Not particularly, because in my estimation, well, in my experience as a country dweller that's lived next to a forest for most of my childhood, that ancient lime trees are characterised by these sorts of features that are typified in this particular lime tree, which is some areas of rot, boulders, hollows, and so on. That's the characteristic of ancient lime trees. It suggests that since the present, effectively, the lapsed permission to remove this lime tree, that permission has lapsed. The lime tree is still in existence. So what I'm trying to establish is effectively get an estimation of what we're proposing here is the removal of an ancient lime tree or relatively old lime tree. I'm trying to establish, has it got 100 years left in it? Has it got 150 years left in it? Has it got 2 years left in it? Which I think would be quite a significant decision on this decision.
Sorry, just to interrupt, but the inspector did comment on the health of the lime tree, and in their report they mentioned about how it was due to be granted to be felled in February 2018, as it was found structurally compromised by a large open cavity in the stem. And they make reference to the fact that it was lapsed, but there's no evidence to suggest that the health of the tree has improved, and they did a site visit as well, considered those details.
It's still there 4 years later and hasn't been felled, and it hasn't fallen down of its own volition. So what I understand that the inspector has made an inspection and made a judgment on this particular lime tree, but time has shown that his judgment about the stability of the lime tree might be incorrect.
I think I probably need to declare, I would have supported the in-principle objection originally, and so now find ourselves in a position where we have an in-principle approval and looking at the technical detail. So the team's response to this one is on the basis that there is an in-principle consent which has been informed by the inspector. In an open environment, a lime tree with holes and cavities would be welcome because that contributes to the sort of the contribution it makes for wildlife. In an urban environment where safety is also an issue, a diseased tree poses a risk. And I wasn't working for the council in 2018, I think it is, when the TPO consent was granted, so I don't know the reasons behind that, other than to know that the officer would have made an assessment at that time and felt it was reasonable. But that doesn't mean that a tree is going to fall down immediately or in 10 years, but it increases the risk. And the inspector took the view, as he did, as my colleague has pointed out to you.
Does that provide an answer of sorts? All right, we may return to this point. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I can see that this development can work in principle, but it does concern me that the building is quite large. You've got 4 bedrooms, potentially up to 5 cars, maybe a commercial vehicle going in there. And I'm wondering what criteria the officers consider the parking arrangements to be satisfactory.
Yeah, through you, Chair, the level of parking provided is in accordance with our own JLPSPD. They are indicative car parking standards. The indicative standards indicate up to 3 spaces for a 4-bedroom property. However, it could be argued that this is a relatively sustainable location. It's only a short distance away from Manamead Road, which has got a considerable number of bus movements along there. So on balance, the proposal of 2 spaces per unit is considered to be acceptable as a standard of car parking for this development.
Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. I think we need to bear in mind that we've already had one instance of the committee taking a decision on this site and it being overturned. So I want us today to reach a decision that if it is not in accordance with the officer recommendation, is something that's robust enough to stand up at appeal. And we, for whatever reason, failed last time. And I don't think we'd be doing anyone any favours if we reached a decision that was to refuse, but was too weak to go to appeal, to be relied on. So I think it would help if you could, Amy, remind us what's in our gift today to consider and what isn't. What has the inspector laid down, whether we like it or not, what has the inspector said has to be considered acceptable? And following on from that, where's our room for manoeuvre in terms of what we can consider? I think that would assist everybody if we could.
So in terms of the permission in principle, the 3 things that were being considered was the location, land use, and the amount. So they're saying 4 is allowed, it's allowed as residential use, and the location is suitable. What also the inspector considered, which I know that I spoke to a lot of length, but in terms of they were happy with the loss of trees, they were happy with the indicative layout they commented on, but things that they didn't consider or wasn't part of their permission in principle considerations was the number of parking, the design, the impact on amenity, the replacement trees. So stuff that is technical, like when we spoke on the site visit yesterday, and what you may be more familiar with is an outline and a reserve matters consent. I know that we've dealt with many of these previously at Planning Committee, and it's similar in that instance that the outline for this site to be developed for 4 houses on this site has been given, but the finer details such as parking, design, and mitigation for trees and things like that haven't been, and that's what's being considered as part of this application.
See, I'm just conscious that under normal circumstances, the issue of the trees would be highly contentious and arouse a lot of opinion. I'm just trying to work out how much room for manoeuvre we have on that one. If we did want to turn this down on the basis of saving the lime tree, how tied are our hands on that? Obviously, we can vote on anything today, but when it inevitably would go on to appeal, given the previous inspector's decision, how likely would that refusal reason on its own be likely to succeed?
In my opinion, it would be weak, given that the inspector has specifically stated in their decision about the fact the loss of these trees aren't a reason to refuse this application. The previous application was refused based on the loss of these trees and the site not being big enough to mitigate it, and they have overturned that decision. So my advice or my opinion would be, if we refused it due to the loss of the lime tree, I think it would be a really weak reason for refusal.
Thanks. See, thank you. Where we are at the moment, the big issue in terms of what's still available to us to consider is the design, and it just struck me on the site visit yesterday, and it was helped by the overhead shot that Amy put up, that although there are different designs in the area, it is still a relatively historic part of Plymouth, and the building that's where you can where you see the left-hand lettering of Mutley Road. I don't know if you've got your cursor up there. Oh, that's okay. So the building opposite the site, just to the left as we look at it, that's set down with quite a bright yellow square with 2 black dots just above it, if people can see what I'm talking about. That is quite an unattractive sort of 1970s building that's, albeit set back from the road, does stand out quite badly. But the fact that it does stand out so badly, in my view, shows that the rest of the historic environment in terms of architecture is still surprisingly intact. And I think looking at this really helpful image, to remove that big clump of trees and hedgerow in the middle and replace it with 4 very, very ultra-modern houses, we are into sort of sticking out like a sore thumb territory, which wouldn't be in keeping. That's the big issue that I have at the moment. I'm not going to say all other issues are satisfied as far as I'm concerned, but in terms of the biggies, ones that are informing my voting at the moment, that's the big one. I think one of the options, of course, would be to sort of mirror the 1890s very late Victorian terrace that this would be attached to. And you do get into difficulty with trying to have sort of pastiche and imitation. We can all think of our favourite example where that's gone a little bit wrong. But I think this is, at the moment, erring too far in the opposite, ultra-modern direction, given where we are. But that's where I am, and I'll obviously listen with interest to what other people have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Finn.
Yeah, I'd like to take on what Councillor Stevens has said and Councillor Goslin with regard to the tree density. I don't think it's appropriate, and I think the aesthetics of what's proposed is totally out of character with the area. One thing I did pick up with regard to policy, I believe, is that there should be a window distance of 16 metres apart and on this development it's 21 metres.
Sorry, that's the other way round.
It's the other way
Minimum of
round.
21, this one 16 metres.
Yeah,
is that
sorry.
right?
Yeah, so I did notice that that is out of scope with regard to policy alone. If we look at the makeup, I think it's common sense to suggest, and it has been suggested here in committee this afternoon, that it may have 2 parking spaces, but in reality there's going to be 1 parking space. So therefore the 6 cars, a possible 3 cars per dwelling, that's another 12 cars. Where are they going to park? Accessibility, I think as a committee from a technical point of view, we'd need to look at a weight restriction on any vehicles entering that road. Rather than a 22-ton vehicle, it'd have to be, if it was to be granted, shall we say, it would have to be restricted to a 7.5-ton vehicle to prevent damage to the highway, etc. And then obviously we come to the issue of the render and the makeup of the building. I think the brick that's proposed is totally out of character of the area. Whatever's proposed with regard to the structural aesthetic of the building needs to be of render makeup like the rest of the street. And I don't impart the word, not a cheap render, i.e. K-Ren, just to cover it up. It needs to be a proper sand and cement render so that the buildings look aesthetically pleasing in 10, 15 years' time. So I think there's a lot of, and obviously visitor parking, I'm very concerned with regard to visitor parking in that area. And obviously visitor parking impacts on the community. So all in all, I think I'm mindful with regard to the technical issues that have been brought to committee this afternoon, to actually defer this for further consideration with regard to the final technical issue and design of this development. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Finn. In addition to the observations you've made, there were some questions in there. Certainly, Councillor Finn's raised the issue of the distance between the properties. That is, as I think you discussed, a departure from policy on that. So I think Councillor Finn wanted your thoughts on that. He's also raised the rendering of the property, and I know that there was a concern about the honey buff brick, I think it is, or something like that. And the appropriateness of that in contrast to the other properties. And visitor parking was the third question. Those of us who were on the site visit yesterday, I got stuck behind an ambulance at the care home, so I had to move car and walk through the park, which was lovely, of course. However, parking is a serious issue. Visitor parking is non-existent. And even while we were there, a van attempted to go up the one-way restriction at the top of Mutley Road. So we all know that's quite a significant pinch point. So I think those are the 3 substantive issues that you raised at the moment. So if we could have a response in respect of those, please.
Yep, sure. So in terms of separation distances, yep, it doesn't comply with our guidance that's in the supplementary planning document. With regards to Mutley Road, so the properties that are in front of the site, the separation distances are similar to the rest of the terrace. I've kind of just put up the site plan so you can kind of see the separation distances that are already existing in the area. So yeah, it is in compliance, but given the pattern of development in the area and more densely populated areas, I didn't consider it to be a reason to refuse it on those grounds. And similar to the property that was to the rear, it is raised above the site, and there's also additional planting and an existing boundary. So again, while it didn't comply, there is a boundary treatment there that will provide some screening. So didn't consider a reason to refuse on those grounds. So because it is guidance, so we can, it is more of a consideration rather than policy. With regards to the honey buff and the render, I agree with the honey buff brick isn't suitable. So I've discussed it with the applicant, and we agreed to have an external materials condition. So before they can even commence on site, they would need to submit satisfactory details about what they would be putting for the external materials of the site. So we would be looking for something that's more either render or painted brick, or something that would be more suitable and more in keeping with the area, that would maybe make the design sit better within the setting. And then with regards to visitor parking, I might just ask my colleague from Highways.
Yes.
Can I just interrupt before we come to you? Just on two of those, if I may, ask you to expand more. In terms of the distance at the back of the property, you're saying that's been mitigated by tree planting. Our existing trees, have I got that right?
So there's existing trees,
Yeah.
and additional planting is proposed.
But the additional planting will be young and will grow over the years. So will it provide screenage exclusively, or will there be a period until that then complies?
So at the moment, from site yesterday, there was some screening between the two properties, and because of the level changes, I think there's sufficient screening as it is, and it's also going to be boosted up by additional planting. There is an obscure glazing for one of the windows for the roof lights, and also one of the properties one of the rooms to the back is obscured glazed anyway because it's a bathroom. So I think with the conditions, with the existing site boundary treatment, the ground level changes and the additional planting would provide sufficient screening for privacy.
In due course, when that grows.
Even more so, yeah. But even without the mitigation, I feel like it'd be sufficient.
Yeah, Chair. Just to confirm, like I say, the level of parking is in accordance with our standards. The limited availability of parking in the area is likely to result in the garage being used. I know that a number of locations in the city garages aren't used, but because of the limited on-street availability of on-street parking, there's a greater likelihood of the garage actually being used for parking rather than not being used. In terms of visitor parking accepted, and no dedicated visitor parking is provided as part of the proposal, and that would have to be sought further away from the site. There are opportunities, albeit limited, for some visitor parking in the area, but accepted that it is a very heavily parked area.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Allen. Can I just ask a supplementary on that response? Having visited the site, the point was raised, I can't recall it, who made the point earlier, but the applicant, number 21, currently uses the site to park vehicles, and in some of the images we saw more than one vehicle. So there's a displacement, a natural displacement going to follow if that's no longer available to number 21 to use. And the turning provision of cars, if the occupants of these four dwellings use their driving garage, which we would hope they would, if approved, would make it incredibly difficult. There's no turning circle. I think it was a point Councillor Mahoney made. Has that been taken into consideration? How, because it's a one-way at the end, shortly after where this plan ends on a Mutley Road, you can't go any further because it's one way. So how would the vehicles turn in the road when they've established, one, they can't park there, and two, they can't get on their own drive? Has that been considered, taken into account?
Yeah, in terms of turning provision, although tight, there is sufficient space with a vehicle parked on the driveway to be able to do a three-point turn as identified through the tracking plans. We would normally require a distance of around 5.5 to 6 metres. Because of the footpath being provided along the frontage combined with the remaining width of the road, taking into account there's always vehicles parked on the opposite side, it comes to around 5.4 metres, which is just 100 millimetres below the minimum standard to allow a vehicle to turn around. As I've mentioned in my comments to the planning officer, that situation could be improved if the applicant was to actually lower the footpath along the entire frontage of the development. That then provides a greater scope for being able to turn around within the space available.
So it's below what would you accept is the standard, and you've had a conversation, would they lower the curb the entire development, and the outcome of that?
It's slightly below, but like I say, I come back to the point that we would be happy to drop the, we have suggested under the street details condition, you could drop the curbs along the frontage, which would provide greater scope in terms of being able to overcome the 100 mil difference, compared to our required, turning standards.
Thank you. I have Councillor Tui.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, and I do apologise for not being on the site visit this time, but I did have a ward advice surgery on, and I thought I'd best be there for my residents. I was, however, at the first site visit because I was on the planning committee then, and I wasn't too happy with the thing then, and I'm not don't feel a lot better now. So, but I really would like to answer a couple of questions. I actually didn't have too much objection to the design of the houses, but that honey buff, which has come up before, I mean, it was totally out of place, and I would have been quite happy to refuse it on that count, and I'm glad to hear render would be very much better. I still am unhappy about the loss of the trees, particularly the mature trees and the wildlife habitat. I can't see why that hedge overlooking the wall can't be controlled and kept in place. I really can't. But the question on that, I would like to ask you, say that there will be street trees replaced. What kind of trees are they going to be? Is somebody going to turn around in 10 or 15 years and say, oh dear, they got the wrong trees, we'll have to cut them down? I'd like to be reassured, please.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry. So we've conditioned the details of street trees to be submitted along with the replacement trees. So they will be submitted to us, and also in conversation with the natural infrastructure team to ensure that they are suitable trees for the area.
Okay, you don't know what kind of trees, they're just going to be suitable. Well, I'm just, there are other places in the city at the moment where the big argument is that they're going to be trees cut down. Oh, well, they were suitable at the time. It seems to be becoming a common expression, and I'd like a bit more information, really.
I think perhaps the more crucial question is, because I believe that the street trees that will be planted will be heavy standards, so that there's an immediate sort of amenity value. And having heard the discussion around vehicle movements and the limited space, I think my experience of trees going in, vehicles moving and trees don't mix unless you give adequate protection. And I think part of the hard landscaping, having heard the discussion, is that we would seek steel cages around those street trees. That probably then has an implication in terms of turning circle, because it obviously is a larger area than the tree itself. So I would be concerned, in light of the discussion around just how tight things are with vehicles, that the trees might be at risk.
A very good point. Anything further on that, Councillor Tui? No?
Thank you, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's evident as we have the debate that there's quite a lot of unanswered questions and really a number of issues that do need to be resolved, I think, to member satisfaction before really any conditional consent would be given. So happy to start with by saying I would second Councillor Finn's proposal to defer, because I doubt very much we're going to bottom out some of the detail that members seek. And I think it's important in a community such as this for those details to be agreed up front as part of the planning application and not wholly left to conditions and dealt with in due course. So the two or three things I would like to raise are more on the details. So supplementary planning guidance. I'm not sure you can compare development that took place decades ago with the modern standard that came subsequent to the joint local plan. And to suggest that, therefore, new development in an area that's already been built, there's no point having supplementary planning guidance unless you're only going to do it for brand new estates like Sherford, Woolwell, and large schemes. So I'm a bit disappointed here from officers that, yeah, it doesn't meet the supplementary guidance. It's only guidance, and therefore it can be dismissed. So in relation to the issue of design, Amy, could the design not be altered so that supplementary planning guidance actually is adhered to in terms of distance between properties, rather than just assuming that because the rest of the street is, what, 70, 80, 90 years old, or older, that therefore, well, it was acceptable then, is acceptable today, because that isn't our policy. So that's the first question. Do you want to do them in order?
Yeah, no, that'd be helpful. So they haven't put it forward for me to consider it at the guidelines within the SPD. So they could obviously amend the design, but I don't know what that would look like, and obviously that could impact on other aspects of the design. So obviously we've got to consider it as what's in front of us. But I can't say for sure whether they are able to accommodate the guidance in which it sets out in the SPD.
Thank you. So I would suggest, Chair, if the committee were minded to defer, that is a question, not only that perhaps with the aid of the urban design team, but the applicants need to look at the plans and whether they can be tweaked to comply with the distance rules that the council have got. Also, looking at your conditions, I fully appreciate the condition number 7, construction traffic management plan, and the little reference in there about construction operation hours. Now, you'll be only too familiar as members will be aware that normally have a code of practice condition which is driven by the Public Protection Department, which actually is a standard condition which seeks to protect the impact of development on the local community. The difference between the normal standard code of practice condition is it's driven by a standard from the local authority, whereas your pre-commencement condition 7 is relying on the applicants to submit it. So I do think that it's important, Chair, that there's a separation between the traffic, which, you know, clearly needs to be sorted and public protected, and really making sure that our normal excellent standard of protecting the public through the code of practice condition is also added, and there's a separation. So one is driven by the local authority, the other is driven really by the applicant. So I suggest again that could be taken away and considered, because I'm not sure that the applicant's going to be that robust on policing or proposing to police the hours of operation of their scheme. So I think those are the main points, Chair, and I think actually, you know, a bit more time and consideration, taking on board what other members have said, would be very worthwhile to try and get the right development here that's appropriate for the site, but also appropriate for the local community. Thank you.
I'm very grateful. Thank you, Councillor Nixon. I note Councillor Finn moved and it's been duly seconded. I do have some speakers still on the list, so I think it's important that we take those representations and comments in. So if we can just hold that back for the moment. Thank you. I have Councillor Goslin next on my list. Oh, sorry. Councillor Allen, forgive me. Thank you, Councillor Goslin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that the grounds of amount of development actually wasn't upheld and was overturned on appeal to the inspector. It's a completely inappropriate amount of development in my view, and the parking problems are going to cause horrendous problems for many years to come. And again, you know, it just seems that the inspector's report, there's a lot of sort of, some of it's bordering on personal taste, which I didn't think we were allowed to bring into planning decisions as a material consideration, but apparently the inspector can. So it kind of seems like we're really up against it, whatever we do. Is the issue of town cramming and overdevelopment, is that something that can also be considered at technical detail stage or not?
I think it is something that can be considered, but again, in this case, I think because the inspector has commented on it, because it was a reason for refusal in the last one, again, I think if we included it in a refusal reason, I think it would be weak again.
Okay, that's frustrating, but also helpful in terms of how we tackle this next. I mean, I personally am still minded to refuse. I haven't yet heard anything new that's a compelling reason to make me vote in favour of this application. And that's not just because it's an application that's in my patch as a ward councillor. So yes, on this occasion, I think I'm minded to agree with Councillors Nicholson and Finn that we seek a deferral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Apologies for overlooking you. I made a note opposite your name, but it was the previous speaker. Councillor Goslin.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, can I ask about the decision of the planning inspector when he noted that there was sufficient space for 4 dwellings? Was it noted that there were 4 dwellings of, I believe, 4-bedroom properties, or is it just 4 dwellings?
Yeah, it's just 4 dwellings. It doesn't make any reference to numbers, and the indicative plans that they showed, I don't think they showed an internal layout. They just showed the layout of the dwellings as they were.
So it seems to me, to you, Chair, that there is quite a significant difference between 4 1-bedroom dwellings and 4 4-bedroom dwellings, in the fact that a single-bedroom dwelling would be significantly smaller, the parking requirements and the impact on the local environment would be a lot smaller than what we're seeing now is an indicated 4-bedroom dwelling, 4 times 4-bedroom dwellings, which seems, what we're seeing effectively a large impact on the local community and cramming. In effect, it's not cramming due to the number of properties, but cramming effectively due to the size and the density of those properties in there being large 4-bedroom properties of 3.5 stories, which is unusual. So I'd like to make that point. And secondly, I would say that the design of the properties trying to accommodate the parking to accommodate those 4 bedrooms are largely out of keeping with the environment, because as far as I'm aware, and I know this road quite well, there are no property over garage existing houses on that street, or in fact in this general area. Would that be the case?
I think there's one integral garage, which is, if I can show you where it is, if I'd give you this one. So you can see the two, the pair of semi-detached just to the left of the property. The property next door, there's an integral garage. You can see the drive is just there's a car on the drive, and behind that's an integral garage. So yeah, it's not common, but there is one of a garage and a drive.
Okay, so that's an integral garage. That's a garage which is detached from the property, but there are no properties on this street or the area where the garage is built into the main dwelling itself. So
no, with that one it's integral and it's got accommodation above. So it's an extension where they've kind of done a 2-story extension, garage on the ground floor, accommodation above.
I mean, personally speaking, I would say that those properties at the end of Mutley Road are out of keeping with the neighbourhood. They do stand out in distinct, that's very distinct from the 1920s, 1930s terrace architectural style that you see in this area and across Peveril in general. I mean, my opinion that these properties are very much out of character with the style, and that they have been designed in such a way as to overcome some of the parking considerations that that are trying to eke out an extra parking space to create these 4-bedroom properties, high density properties in what is a terraced area where they don't have property over garages.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. I think we're in danger of putting up reasons that the inspector will, forgive me, laugh out. The question arising from Jeremy's comments there was, the inspector said you can fit 4 properties on this site. How are we to use that in our thinking? It's probably a question for Stuart or Natalie, in terms of were it to be 4 very small bungalows or 4 20-bedroom properties, let's be silly to prove a point, would our decision-making be the same? At what point can we say these 4 dwellings that are proposed, which the inspector has said are acceptable, at what point do we, if at all, at what point can we say, no, these 4 proposed ones are too big for the site? That's my first question. So I think that's fundamental to this problem with cramming. If we have to accept any 4 dwellings, however big, then I just think we forget that now because the inspector will laugh that out, if that's the answer.
Yeah, so I think in the appeal statement, the inspector does reference the documents that have influenced the decision, and it does mention, obviously, the tree surveys, the arboricultural statement, etc., but together with indicative site layouts to show how a terrace of 4 houses could be accommodated on the site. So the inspector has used, and I think you've got that on the first slide, haven't you, Amy? So that is the proposal that the inspector has considered in determining the amount of development that's acceptable on the site in principle. But as Amy said, that doesn't indicate the number of bedrooms, the number of people that would be living in those properties, etc., or the story heights, that would need to be accommodated.
As our senior technical advisor, if I can describe you in that way today, Stuart, if we were to refuse on grounds of overdevelopment and all things connected therewith, given that the inspector has ruled that is acceptable, how strong would a refusal reason on overdevelopment be were that to go to appeal?
So I think we need to be specific about what the negative impacts of the overdevelopment are. So are you talking, so various things have been mentioned in terms of car parking or other impacts, the distance. So that obviously the footprint of the building is going to impact on the privacy distances between the properties, etc. I think that's already been raised. So if members are minded to be looking at that, then we need to be very specific about the issues that are arising from the proposal that you've got on the table. And a generic statement of overdevelopment won't cut it, if I can be frank, in this instance, because the quantum of four dwellings with that indicative layout has already been assessed.
On car parking, again, I think we also need to be very, very careful because we've heard anecdotal things and inspectors don't deal in anecdotes. So the fact that the current owner, who also we're told lives at number 21 adjoining the site, might be using the site for, we've heard, half a dozen vehicles. I don't think we saw any there yesterday, if memory, but I'm willing for you to correct me. I don't think there were any parked in the red line. But my experience is that inspectors won't look at, well, somebody may own some, what if a car collector moves into one of these who owns a collection of 20 cars, where inspectors will throw that out straight away, in my experience. What they also won't consider with much time is this issue of using the garages. If we're proposing a garage and then a space in front of that garage, yes, there will be difficulty in terms of manoeuvring, but what's proposed are 2 spaces. However difficult that might be for the owners, what the inspector will look at is, are you providing 2 spaces per house? And the inspector will say yes and throw everything else out. The fact, if someone wants to use their garage for storage and only park on the driveway, that's not something, I promise you, in my long experience, that's not something the inspector will take into account and throw out. I really think the strongest issue here is the design and it not being in keeping with the area. And I'm not asking Amy to go back, but we did see the overhead shot looking at all the Victorian architecture, a couple of interwar properties and pretty much nothing else. These will stand out like a sore thumb. And my experience is that that's the key thing that the inspector will look at. In terms of the deferral, I'm not quite sure what's being asked for, because a deferral is for new information, something we don't know now that we can't make a decision without. I think I've got all the information I need, so I don't know what it, as Donald Rumsfeld said, I don't know what it is that we don't know, that we need to know, that we're better off in a month's time. That's what I'm a bit confused about at the moment.
Councillor Stevens, it's very helpful. I will come in a moment, Councillor Nixon. Can I just go back to one of the points that Councillor Stevens made, and it's about the 4 dwellings. The inspector looked at it and said the indicative plans of 4 dwellings set out in those indicative plans, the inspector felt that it is an appropriate amount in this footprint. If, however, the committee were to determine that, well, hang on a minute, 4 dwellings might be acceptable, but they should perhaps be a 2 or 3 bedroom in size, which is a design matter, is that a sufficient consideration for this committee to say, well, we understand the position of the inspector, but 4 bedroom properties of that style and nature is too much for that site, but something smaller, times 4, could be considered. Is that not a design consideration?
Yeah, the design of the development is a relevant consideration for this stage of the application. So if the committee feel that the design at the moment isn't compatible with the street scene, isn't in character with the existing street, and is harmful in that respect, then that is a decision that you can take. In terms of the quantum, in terms of the numbers of bedrooms, you'd have to be quite specific about what the harm is. So what's the difference in terms of the impact between a 2 and a 4 bedroom house? Like I say, you've mentioned parking, but there may be other issues. So,
and it may feed into those distance between property issues. It's part of the design, technical design stage that we're being asked to consider, as opposed to whether there should be 4 dwellings on that. I will come back to you, Councillor. Did you want to come in on that point? I'm trying to facilitate all the debate. It's not that I'm ignoring you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's perhaps, in my mind, coming down to sort of quart into a pint pot. And I've seen many applications over the years where something great is proposed in terms of ecological mitigation, only to fail in the delivery. And I think perhaps a key consideration for committee is, on balance with all the things you've heard, do the conflicting elements actually put a question in your mind as to whether this can be brought forward realistically and delivered? So can you get all of those trees and 2 parking spaces and the manoeuvring and everything else?
I'm going to have to raise a point of order, which we don't regularly have at this committee, and I'm reluctant to do that regularly. We rely on officer advice, and I've been told the officer recommendation is to approve. I'm now hearing from and the officers should speak as one. That's what we expect. They have all the conversations, sometimes it's design versus trees versus parking, and it's Amy's job, under Stuart's watchful eye, to distill all that, to weigh up all those balances and say, I'm recommending approval or refusal. I'm now hearing from officers that it might not be an approval, that's the recommendation. So I really think we need, just as if, Stuart said, well, I think we should approve, and Natalie said, well, we should refuse, and Amy said, we've never done this before, that officers come in and say, well, maybe Amy's recommendation might not be so. I want this, maybe deferral is correct after all, but for a very different reason. I want to know, do the officers speak with one voice in public that the recommendation is to approve? Because I'm very doubtful from what I've just heard.
I'm quite happy to deal with that in a moment. Councillor Nicholson.
Can I come on Councillor Stevens' point? Because, Amy did say as the case officer that the judgment is finely balanced. And I think it's only fair that other officers with their expertise certainly proffer their opinion. That's what officers are for. We are, Councillor Stevens, considering a report put forward by the officers, but clearly we've had numerous queries and concerns, and all the officer team are doing is trying to answer our concerns. So I think your point of order is unfair. But if I can come in on the other matters in a minute.
I'll bring you in on that matter. Would you like to respond to Councillor Stevens' point of order in respect of some light between the officers, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the case officer prepares the report, takes on board all the comments that they've received from all of the consultees and comes to an on-balance recommendation, and that's a recommendation before committee. You know, you'll note in the report that there are objections from some consultees, but the case officers explained the reasons for that. But in terms of natural infrastructure, I don't believe there's any objection to the application, and they are behind the recommendation for approval.
Well, we just heard the phrase "things might not be deliverable," and that's normally something. Forgive me. That's normally something you'd hear from an objector speaking. That sort of phrase. So, are we saying I'm very confused when officers tell me things might not be deliverable? That then starts to question which way I vote.
Councillor Stevens, where I am, having read the report as you have, having heard the officers, having seen the officer's recommendation, having listened to the senior officer, I take the view that the recommendation has been put forward by Amy as the officer in this case, and we are to determine whether this committee agree with that, if we would seek to defer it for other reasons, or even depart from that recommendation. I'm quite comfortable in the responses that I've heard, and sometimes there is some light between officers. But the lead officer, Amy, in this matter, has put a recommendation, and that's what we're discussing. So I'm quite content that that matter's been discussed. Councillor Nicholson, you wanted to come in on a different point.
Yeah, it was really on the substantive point that Councillor Stevens raised about, well, why defer, not refuse? And the reason that, and I think committee generally need to take on board that this site has got an approval. And so we're playing a very dangerous game if members should decide just to refuse the current scheme, and the current scheme would then go completely potentially off to the inspectorate, and you might then end up with a formal development that is totally unacceptable. And I would urge members, for the benefit of the local community, there are certain issues that need further discussion. Design is a key one, Councillor Stevens, because the design can actually reduce the scale of the actual development. It could configure windows in a way that you conform with policy. And I think it's important actually, and I would suggest with your knowledge of planning, that a planning inspector's starting point is council policy, and then judging application against policy. Now we have a situation at the moment where the proposal is against certain aspects of our policy that actually, with a bit more discussion with the applicant, you could get a better form of development. So, you know, it's very easy to, well, just throw it out, defer the decision to an inspector who might live in Timbuktu, when actually we could have meaningful discussion with the applicants to get a pattern of development, a form of development that is more acceptable to the local community. So that's why I would urge members to defer. And I think the sooner we do that, the sooner we can get on and actually have a meaningful discussion. You know, the agents at the back, hopefully he'll relay the concerns that members have raised, and there can be a meaningful and honest debate with the developer on what's currently before us. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Watkin.
Thank you. I read in the report this is a designated critical drainage area, and I just wonder what extent that has been taken into consideration by the inspector, if at all.
So drainage wasn't considered by the planning inspector. That's part of a technical details consent, so it's something that will be considered at this stage.
Detail.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Members, I do not have any more speakers registered. Oh, forgive me, missed you. Thank you, Councillor Allen, returning the favour.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that, you know, a lot of the issues that have come up in this planning meeting are because, you know, there's no one smoking gun for this particular development, but there are a lot of leeways being given on a lot of different elements, basically because the applicant has decided effectively to try and pour quart into a pint pot by putting lots, you know, such a large scale property. So if you go through the occupant amenity isn't up to the requirements. The neighbourhood amenity is not quite within the requirements. It's just lots of small things where we're just you're skating on the edge of the requirements, or not, or failing to comply with them. And also, for the green spaces, that the replacement of canopy, on site would not replace, according to the infrastructure report, would not replace the canopy which is already existing, would require tree planting off site. Doesn't seem to be any plans within this for how that tree planting and where that tree planting off site would be in order to alleviate the cut down, the reduction in canopy caused by the removal of the mature trees. So it seems to me, and added onto this, we've got as I mentioned previously, the requirement to try and push 4 bedrooms onto each of these properties, meaning you've got a design which is completely out of character with the local area, which then knocks on to the effect of parking and turning circles by having to have under property garages, with the issues that have been raised by the fact that you can't concurrently easily park 2 cars in these properties. Many of these considerations, many of these issues would have been much alleviated by not having such high density properties in this space, by not planning 4-bedroom properties. If there were much smaller properties, then many of the considerations that were outlined in the original objections from this committee of cramming would have been alleviated. But the developers seem to come back with properties which are, which cause many of the issues that are originally outlined.
I'm grateful, thank you for that summary. That being the case, I'm grateful very much for all the contributions and from the speakers who attended and made representations. We've heard an awful lot, not wishing to sum up what's been discussed, but I think everybody has raised the issues in terms of parking, access for visitors, turning points, trees, removal of them, the departures from policy and guidance, code of practice conditions, drainage, parking generally, the implications on the highway because of the size of the properties and likely use of vehicles, before we even mentioned the design in terms of the render and the honeybuff brick, not in keeping with the street. Whilst the learned inspector has taken a view in the indicative plans that was before him on the papers, he or she, and attended a site visit, it is just that, the indicative plans. It's this committee that determines the technical details and the design and how that impacts on the neighbourhood and the community that these dwellings will be situated in. And it's right that we haven't had sufficient detail to deal with that today. And I take on board the point that the representative for the applicant is present, and no doubt will take that back. But I am minded to agree with the notion that we should be deferring this to get that detail for the reasons that have been presented. So on that basis, there is a motion that has been put to the committee that this matter should be deferred for, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, can we, before we defer, can we be specific about what information we are seeking and the time frame that we would be looking to defer? I mean, obviously the applicant can, appeal against non-determination, so it's not, we need to be very specific that we're deferring the application to a future committee, and that the items or the additional information that you are looking for is in the applicant's ability to provide, I think.
So I have a list, but Councillor Nicholson, as you've been part of the motion to move, please proceed.
I think on timescale, Stuart, it's very much down partly to the applicant to determine a timescale, isn't it? So the issues we've raised in committee, the sooner they can address those, the sooner there can be some meaningful discussion around around design, then the timescale, I don't think it's for committee today to say in 3 weeks' time you'll have all the information, because we don't know how meaningful and manageable that will be. I think what is important is to encapsulate what the committee are asking for. So you're absolutely right, and the chair has summarised, I think, much of the discussion and debate that members have had. So unless you want the chair to run through it again, I think we just heard it all. That is really the basis of the deferral, is to discuss all the points that Councillor Darcy read out, and certainly included the points that Councillor Finn and I, in our proposal and seconding for a deferral, put forward some time ago.
So I agree with the point in terms of timescale. It's a matter for the agent and the applicant, rather, to influence that. It's not a case of non-determination. We have raised some points that we are being tasked to do as a planning committee in terms of determining this matter on the technical detail. That's what we've been doing today since 4 o'clock. And all of these issues have been raised. And we are saying there's insufficient information in respect of the design, including the render, including the number of...
So what's the information that's lacking? If people are unhappy with bricks, we could decide to have render now. So I don't know what officers need to go away and discover that we don't have today. If people are unhappy with, I'll say it again, if you're unhappy with the punny brick things, we could have render today.
But Councillor Stevens, through you, you know darn well that we don't make these things up without a discussion with the applicants. You know that generally conditions aren't imposed on applicants without their consultation and discussion. So that sort of attitude doesn't actually assist the matter.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. I was going to reply to say we have to determine the application that's been presented on behalf of the applicant. The applicant has put forward the honey buff bricks. It's been mooted by many members that that is not in keeping with the environment that these dwellings are being proposed to be built in. Therefore, one of the design issues, there are many that have been raised, is the exterior of the property. That is the applicant minded to amend or change the exterior of the property from what's been proposed to something more in keeping with the dwellings. That's something that we should be exploring rather than simply refusing it on the basis that we don't like the honey buff. That's the tone of the debate that I made notes on. So when asked to run through the list as I'm attempting to do, one of the many design aspects was the exterior of the properties. In addition to complying with policy and guidance, it's been noted in the officers' representations that they fall short in terms of the amenity outlook, some 5 metres short of policy and guidance. Can that be addressed by the applicant? It would be noteworthy to have it deferred in order that those inquiries can be explored.
So what you mean is deferral for further negotiation? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yes, of course.
That's the first time we've said the word negotiation then. So I'm looking at the material. In no point in the report, as far as I know, does the phrase honey buff brick appear. What we're being asked to consider is a plan on external materials to be agreed. So whether or not we have, if we were to approve it, and I'm reluctant to, what normally happens, as you know, and you're a long-standing member, is that we actually agree things here. And I'm struggling to see what we don't know that we need to go away and find out. And the fact that Stuart had to ask a few times shows that that's a view that's shared.
I think it's quite clear it's about the density of the buildings. We know we can get 4 buildings on the plot. Are they 1, 2, 3 bedrooms? So that's a mitigating factor. We're also looking at aesthetics of the building, the design of the building. We're looking at visitor parking. We're looking at how we come away from policy with regard to 21 metres to 16 metres. And I think all these issues need to be discussed and reconciled at some point to actually come back to us. And by deferring it, it gives that opportunity for the officers and that to reconcile these points so that in negotiation with the developer to have a better situation in regard to what the development will be there finally.
Thank you, members. Just allow me a moment to discuss with the senior officer. I'm grateful. Thank you, members. I just wish to speak to the senior officer just to seek a point of clarification and to assist where I understand that we are. And having had that discussion, what's been proposed to the committee is that this matter should be deferred to allow the officers and the applicant time to explore the design and that means architectural and aesthetic design of the properties, and that would be to be brought back at the next planning committee meeting for determination. That, as I understand it, is what's been proposed, and the concerns raised by councillors who put forward that proposal are encapsulated in the wording of architecturally and aesthetic design in respect of the 4 dwellings, notwithstanding the fact that the applicant's agent is present and would have heard all the debate. As I understand it, that's where we are. I see Councillor Nicholson.
I'm grateful, Chair, and I don't really want to sort of elongate this anymore. That generally, with the committee cycle, gives both parties 2 weeks from the time you get to prepare the report and publish the agenda a week before the committee. Is that a meaningful period of time, and wouldn't an extension of time potentially, Stuart, be the better option if in the event that 2 weeks isn't sufficient? If 2 weeks is sufficient, absolutely fine. But in the event it isn't, then, you know, we all know the system, you can get an extension of time. And you don't have to decide it here today, but I think the resolution that Councillor Finn and I moved effectively is to get a meaningful debate, not necessarily to pin us down on a date that it comes back to committee. But I'll leave it to you, Chair.
I take on board the point. I think that's accepted. If it's not this committee, it'll be the next committee. But if you wish to respond to that.
Well, the other question, if
just bear with me.
Apologies, Chair. Apologies.
The next practical committee in respect of that application. So yeah, absolutely. Councillor Stevens.
Yeah. The point I would make is that if are the changes that people are looking for in terms of the what's wrong in some people's minds with the four bedroom properties and the way they look into both their size in terms of the number of bedrooms and their aesthetic appearance in terms of the historic setting, would the changes that councillors would find acceptable still be within the parameters of this application, or would they be so far removed that they would need a fresh application?
Well, we simply don't know the answer to that until we allow that discussion to develop and it comes back to this forum, and only right and in a transparent process those are considered, and then the same question is presented to us at the next.
Well, I think that's a question that can be answered now, that if we said we will only entertain 3-bedroom houses, the site is acceptable for 3-bedroom houses. Given what's on the table, I think it's fair to ask Stuart, would a change from 4 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms need a new application, or is it tweakable enough in its current form? In which case, if the answer is it's not tweakable, then you can have all the discussions in the world, but if you come back and say, yes, they're happy with 3 bedrooms, it means this has to go out the window anyway, and a new 3-bedroom application come in. So if that's the case, pending Stuart's answer, we may as well vote it down now.
Yeah, I mean, we have to determine the application as presented to us. The opportunity for deferral is only to allow further information to be, obtained and presented in order for the committee to make its decision. If that was the only sticking point left, what we can't do is, have a long catalogue of issues that the applicant has, without completely redoing the scheme and would be a different application. It has to be practical. So I think that's what we've been discussing, is to try and pin down exactly what additional information is needed, and is that within the parameters of this application. And I think we were talking about the design and appearance of the dwellings themselves, and in terms of the materials and the architectural finish. I think that's something that could be negotiated with the applicant, over a short period of time to come to a decision as to can there be changes made that would satisfy the committee or not. But that would, we would only want to enter that if the committee was happy on all of the aspects of the scheme, such that additional work could overcome the committee's concerns.
It's only fair I say the answer. My answer as a committee member is no. I think the changes that would need to be made to the aesthetic architectural design of the building to satisfy me to get to a yes vote are too big within the current constraints of this application. I can see a situation where I vote I vote in favour of 4 houses on this site in the current location and the massing, as it were, but nowhere near this design. So you could, it might be different for other councillors, but Stuart would have to come back with a totally different design to satisfy me, and I'm confident that would be so far removed from this that it would need a fresh application to gain my support.
I have Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Gosling before we revisit the deferment.
Chair, Councillor Stevens has been long enough in this game to know exactly how it works. Basically, if the discussions emanate in a sizable change to the plan, then the developer would seek to amend their plans and it would go out to be republicised. So the benefit of the deferral is that it would hopefully then materially improve the scheme. That's really the desired outcome that I would hope from the negotiations. The danger is, turn it down, committee. It will go in its current form to the planning inspectorate and you'll get a worse development. That's ultimately, and I think, Chair, Councillor Finn and I have moved it. I'm surprised we've got such a long debate with Councillor Stevens over our motion.
Well, I'm in favour of hearing everybody's view and turning to Councillor Gosling. If we could keep it brief, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, just to say that I do agree with everything that Councillor Stevens has said, is that in order to make this acceptable would require not just a change to the render or some minor aesthetic changes to the property, but also a change to the structural aspect of the property to bring it in keeping with the rest of the neighbourhood and to bring it in line with the other items that have been addressed. So that would mean that this application would have to be resubmitted. So I see no reason not to reject it now in its current form.
Thank you, members. Thank you. A motion has been put to the committee in that this matter should be deferred in order that the negotiations between the officers and the applicant can be undertaken specifically, in addition to what's been heard today, but specifically in terms of the architectural and aesthetic designs of the 4 dwellings proposed, and that is to come back to committee at the most practicable moment. That motion has been put forward by Councillor Finn and seconded by Councillor Nicholson. I'm now going to put that to the vote. You'll be invited to do so when it appears on your panels. Please vote. We used to have to wait for the time to elapse, but we don't have to. I think it's taken that it's been passed. So I'm very grateful for that debate. It was a very good debate, but the motion has now been passed in respect of that matter. Moving on into the agenda, item number 7, planning enforcement. I ask the committee members to note those that's in the supplement pack that's been served prior to the meeting, pages 31 and 32. Any questions arising? Thank you. Item 8, planning application issues, pages 1 to 34 of that supplement pack. No questions arising. Thank you. And item number 9, appeal decisions, on pages 35 to 38. I think there are 3 in total.
Chair, can I just on one, the one in Plymouth and St Mary Ward, land at Farm Close, actually ask through you, Chair Stewart, to convey appreciation of the hard work that Mr Fox did as the case officer and Carly Francis in dealing with this appeal. So well done, it's a good result.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. That's noted. Any questions in respect to the appeals from anybody else? Thank you. I'm grateful. Members, thank you very much. That concludes the business of today's committee. Thank you very much for your questions and involvement. Thank you.